Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under pressure to support a new truce and hostage release plan. The plan was tabled by the U.S., Israel's closest ally, as an Israeli-endorsed roadmap for an enduring ceasefire to the conflict that has been raging since the 7th of October attack by the terror group Hamas. Netanyahu labeled the plan a non-starter and insists that Israel will keep fighting until Hamas is eliminated. Today we're asking, war in Gaza, is Israel ever more isolated? Hello and welcome to The Point. It is my pleasure to greet our guests. Ronen Steinke is a reporter and columnist for the German daily, the Süddeutsche Zeitung. Markus Bickel heads the security table with a focus on the Middle East at the online in-depth briefing service Table Media. And it's great to welcome Kirsten Hellberg back to the show. She's an independent author and journalist with extensive experience in the Middle East. So an all-German panel this week to get a perspective from here in the heart of Europe. And Ronen, if I may, let me start with you and ask you to talk a little bit about the current situation. As I mentioned, Joe Biden claims that this plan was endorsed and devised by Israel, yet Netanyahu has not exactly embraced it. What chances would you give this plan of succeeding where so many others have failed?
Well, Joe Biden is able to threaten Israel with something very substantial, with pulling back the support, which is so essential to Israel's security. So even though Netanyahu is reluctant, and many in his coalition are even more reluctant to stop the fighting, they're left with no other choice but to cave to the pressure from Washington.
And we want to talk a little bit later about that U.S. support and how far it goes. Kristen, international frustration with Netanyahu and with the Israeli campaign faced a spike after an Israeli airstrike hit a tent camp in Rafah and killed 45 displaced people. What exactly is the current situation now in Gaza and Rafah? What are you hearing?
The situation is devastating, and we are hearing even more attacks. The IDF, the Israeli army, saying that they are attacking, they are going against Hamas militants, and they are killing Hamas fighters on a regular basis. But at the same time, there are a lot of civilians being killed in these attacks. We have then dozens of victims among civilians. And this is the whole question. It's about the question, how is this war being led? We have a hunger crisis that is intensifying because the Rafah crossing, keeps to be closed after Israel took military control of this. So everything goes into another crossing, Kerem Shalom crossing. And we see that even if the humanitarian aid gets in, which has dropped a lot during the last few weeks, even when it gets in, it's very difficult to distribute it due to a lack of fuel and due to a lack of security for humanitarian aid workers as well. So the situation is even more catastrophic and devastating than ever before, I think.
Markus, as I mentioned, Netanyahu has said that he will keep the campaign going despite the pressure until the terror group Hamas is eliminated. In other words, he is looking to keep the military option open. How compatible is that with this ceasefire plan? Would it allow him some room to maneuver?
Yes, it does allow him room to maneuver, and his main aim to eliminate Hamas as a military organization and as an organization which is able to rule Gaza includes the military option. And I think in the long run, Netanyahu or no Israeli government, prime minister, whomsoever, will not give up the right to intervene in Gaza at any time of the conflict. So even if there's a ceasefire or a peace solution, in the long run, Israel, as in the West Bank, will send forces in to fight terrorism.
Let's take a closer look at this three-phase plan. It promises an end to the conflict, the release of the hostages, and reconstruction of Palestinian territory. And it comes at a time when, as we just heard, the situation in Gaza is increasingly dire, as is the desperation of Israelis pleading for the return of family members still being held hostage.
8 months of war and a humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. The people are suffering, and they wish for only one thing. It's enough. We pray to God for a ceasefire. We have lost so much. We have lost all of our loved ones. We have nothing left. We need a ceasefire. We have been broken and humiliated. Then, a few days ago, US President Biden presented a peace plan for Gaza.
It's time to begin this new stage. For the hostages to come home, for Israel to be secure, for the suffering to stop. It's time for this war to end, for the day after to begin.
The plan has phases, beginning with a ceasefire, followed by the release of hostages, and ultimately leading to the rebuilding of the destroyed Gaza Strip. Can the Biden initiative bring peace to the region?
Let me put that question to Ronan and also ask you to unpack the 3 phases of this plan, if you would, briefly, and tell us where you see the biggest challenges, especially in regard to the transition from the temporary ceasefire to the full cessation of hostilities. How workable is that transition going to be, given Netanyahu's desire to hang on to the military option?
So I think peace is a very big word. Let's imagine this plan goes through. What is Hamas going to do? Hamas is going to be allowed to regroup, to retreat, to rearm themselves, and to stage the next attack on Israel in another 2 or 3 years, as they have done in the past 20 years, whenever they were defeated and they were allowed to continue to rule in Gaza and to smuggle arms into the Gaza Strip. So this is the, I would say, positive outlook that Hamas can connect to this deal. And what does it mean for Israel? For Israel, this is not a perspective of peace. This is a perspective of continuing a status quo, which is increasingly untenable for the Israeli society. So I can understand that from an Israeli government perspective, it's very difficult to agree to this deal. What I can't understand, and what I think also bears is worth highlighting, is why Hamas is not jumping and celebrating this chance, because all they have to do to get this incredibly positive deal for them is to let hostages out, children, civilians who are in some dark cellars in the Gaza Strip crying for their mothers at night, something that is unconscionable to all Palestinians also. And that just shows you what kind of a criminal organization they are, with disregard to the life of their own population and that of any other country.
Kristen, please react to that. Biden actually claims that the Israeli campaign has already achieved what it set out to do, namely rendered Hamas incapable of launching another attack similar to October 7th. But Ronan says, well, they're just going to use this first phase, or even first and second phases of the plan, to regroup and get ready to act again. Would you agree with that, or do you think Biden is right?
No, I mean, we definitely agree on the nature of Hamas. There's no doubt about it. But we are seeing that this war and the way it is led does not lead to a defeat of Hamas. We are seeing that for 8 months, this aim of total victory is not working out, because whenever the Israeli army withdraws from an area within Gaza that it had just captured, Hamas is regrouping. So it's not going to work like this. Hamas has to be kept away from power. It has to be demilitarized by political means. And what Hamas is asking in this deal is a permanent ceasefire, an end to this war. And this is basically what most of the world wants to get. This is what President Biden himself says. We need an end to this war at this time, because it's not working out the plan. So I would argue that, yes, it's time to... and the crucial point is, how do we get from phase 1 to phase 2? Because phase 1 says, let's free the female and children hostages and the elderly, and then talk about whether there will be a permanent ceasefire later on. Hamas is saying, we will not agree to release any hostages without the guarantee by the US to stop this war definitely, permanently. So this is the whole point, and I think that right now, within the Israeli public, and according to the families of the hostages especially, the pressure is really mounting on Netanyahu to say, okay, we have to give everything, we have to give in, because the priority now has to be the hostages, especially given the fact that there have been some dead bodies of the hostages have been found within Gaza, so the pressure is mounting, and I think the only way to stop this is to agree to a permanent ceasefire and then to dismantle Hamas and find a solution for post-war Gaza.
How do you dismantle them if you don't?
We can talk about this.
If you withdraw, which is the plan, if the Israeli military withdraws from the Gaza Strip, how do you dismantle them?
You need an alternative to step in.
Let me get Marcus to weigh in here, be a tiebreaker, as it were. Is dismantling Hamas more of a political question than it is a military one? We've seen that Israel says that it has now successfully gained operational control of the 14-kilometer-long, I believe it is, corridor between Gaza and Egypt, after having destroyed many terror organization tunnels there. Would you say that, in fact, does confirm Biden's claim that at least temporarily, for some amount of time, Hamas is no longer able to perpetrate military attacks? And does that then provide a basis for moving toward a political solution?
I don't think we're anywhere close to see Hamas dismantled militarily. And I think the dispute if this ceasefire is going to be temporary or permanent is in the center of all discussions if this three-phase plan can come to a longer political solution. So I think it's also important to see that the Israeli government is all but a monolithic bloc. And if you listen to some of the voices from the Israeli Defense Forces, they differentiate between stopping Hamas from being able to govern Gaza and from defeating it militarily completely. So I think, yes, you can reach the point that Hamas will not be able to govern Gaza, but with the peace plan or the three-phase plan on the table right now, you will not reach a complete military defeat of Hamas.
Ronan, how monolithic is the Israeli government, really? We see two right-wing ministers threatening to walk out if Netanyahu does agree to the ceasefire plan. On the other hand, we also see a somewhat more moderate and very popular politician, Benny Gantz, saying that he is going to walk out if there is not a clear plan for how to govern Gaza by June 8th. So, again, very much Netanyahu under pressure here, also from within his own coalition.
As usual, I would say, for Israeli politics. Look, there are two roads that he can go down. One road is to say, let's not listen to the Americans. Let's go down the road we wanted to go down and carry on until we are pleased that we've sufficiently beaten Hamas. This will take forever. This is not something that you can ever reach. This is probably what a majority of the Israeli public wants. It's, I think, too easy to say it's only the right-wingers. I think it's the majority of the Israeli society who says we will never be able to sleep, we will never be able to relax, knowing that there is this terrorist entity waiting for the next chance to get back at our necks. And the other road that you can go down is if you disagree with the Americans, then they will withdraw their military support, and then the security will collapse. So there's not one good way to go. And given that dilemma, I think Netanyahu and the Israeli public is not left with a choice. If the Americans are going to pull the plug and they're going to stop their military support, which is the threat that's on the table, you have to listen to that. Otherwise, you're going to be completely alone.
Then let's talk about that American support. Marcus, the table, it wasn't a piece by you, but one of your colleagues recently attributed Gantz's decision to threaten to break with Netanyahu to American foreign policy. And I'd like to know why you see this in that context, and also how far you think Biden would go. Clearly, Biden is now trying to express some disappointment with his very close friend, Bibi. But do you really think that the current disappointment in Washington could lead to a real cutoff of crucial arms supplies?
If you look back at to the last 8 months, the Americans were staunchly supporting Israel. There's been a delivery of arms which has not been delivered, but ever since then, arms kept on going to Israel. But of course, it's a leverage from the American side to threaten to stop the security support for Israel. Talking about guns, the West, including the German government, is desperately looking for an alternative to Netanyahu, and Benny Gantz was this man. But looking back in the past, Benny Gantz is not that popular in Israel as he sometimes poses to be. He's been in a government with Netanyahu, even though before those elections he said, I'm never going to go into a coalition with Netanyahu. So that's a bit the situation we have on that issue.
So domestic politics suggesting that this moment might be opportune for Gantz, given the fact that there is this rising pressure on Netanyahu?
Yes, but let's see what happens after June 8th. I have my doubts that Gantz will really leave the war cabinet.
Meanwhile, Kristen, Gantz's condition, but perhaps just one point to that. Gantz's condition here, a workable long-term plan for governing Gaza is not exactly something you come up with overnight. What might a credible governance structure look like? You've said the only way to really cut off Hamas is to find workable governance that doesn't include the terror organization.
And this is something that not only Benny Gantz, but the IDF, the Mossad, the security apparatus within Israel is asking this government to deliver. And the US have been asking this for months. So this is really the big critical point against Netanyahu to give us a vision, because fighting without a political strategy is not leading anywhere. So what the idea is that Israel cannot stay there forever as a military power. This is what the radical ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich dream about. They want to resettle Gaza, but this is not what the military and other political leaders are aiming at. So the idea is who fills the vacuum once the Israeli army withdraws, and it has to be some kind of Palestinian entity. There has been a lot of talks about a government of technocrats. It has to be without any Hamas people, obviously. The PA, the Palestinian Authority, would be the entity that should be, yes, leading this, but it has to be reformed, it has to be more credible, it has to fight corruption. This is where the European Union and the other Arab states come in to forces, and there have been talks going on between different countries in the region who try exactly this. So the idea is that we have a Palestinian entity taking over that is being supported from outside by a US-led multinational force consisting of different Arab nations, the Europeans and obviously the US, that have to guarantee the security of Israel, because Israel will only agree to withdraw whenever the US can guarantee that there will be no danger coming out of Gaza. So this is the short-term roadmap for the Arabs to go into this and to work with this. They have to make sure that there's a long-term perspective for a Palestinian state, for some kind of Palestinian sovereignty. Otherwise, they will not be ready to go in there and just work as the police forces for an Israeli occupation or a security control.
And you mentioned the countries in the region. In fact, meanwhile, the U.S. is also now trying to revive the prospect of an Israeli-Saudi normalization deal. Arab countries have, in fact, been criticized for a response to the crisis that is considered by some of our observers to be largely symbolic and rather feeble. Could the same be said of other international actors now putting pressure on Netanyahu? Let's take a closer look.
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is coming under increasing pressure. More and more countries are criticizing the Israeli army's severe actions in the Gaza Strip. The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court recently requested arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Hamas leaders. The accusations against Netanyahu, deliberate attacks on the civilian population, and using starvation as a weapon of war in the Gaza Strip. Charges against Hamas include war crimes and crimes against humanity. Additionally, an increasing number of EU countries now recognize Palestine as a state, most recently Slovenia. Spain, Ireland and Norway had also just taken this step in order to support a two-state solution in the region. Domestically, Netanyahu is also facing increasing pressure. The far-right politician and coalition partner Itamar Ben-Gvir threatens to break up the coalition if Netanyahu agrees to a ceasefire. Opposition leader Benny Gantz, who is also a member of the war cabinet, is calling for new elections. And resistance is also growing among the population. Tens of thousands of Israelis are taking to the streets, demanding the release of hostages and the quick resignation of the head of government. How isolated is Netanyahu?
Let me put that question to you, Marcus. How isolated is Netanyahu at the moment, and does international pressure really matter to him, given that he is fighting for his political survival at home?
of course, he's under pressure if major international UN institutions face confrontation to Israeli politics. You have the ICC, which is deciding about issuing arrest warrants against Netanyahu, against Defense Minister Gallant, also against Hamas leaders. You've had the recognition of the state, or so-called state of Palestine, by more than 140 states, which increases the isolation. And the question how Israel is going to get out of that, with the United Nations facing it so directly, is the one which will be decided in the coming weeks.
Ronan, I know you have a legal background, so let me ask you to take us on a deeper dive in regard both to the International Criminal Court arrest warrants and also the International Court of Justice's ruling that Israel must halt any military offensive in Rafah that could harm civilians. Juridically, do these charges and the ruling have merit?
So the question is, it's doubtful whether the claim of genocide has merit. The claim of genocide, which was raised by South Africa and brought to the International Court of Justice in The Hague, the Court of Justice has not yet thrown that out. They've used this opportunity to warn Israel from disproportionate attacks, but they've not decided on the merits of genocide. And I think it's very doubtful that they will, in the end, say this is genocide. Because
crimes against humanity?
Crimes against humanity, probably also doubtful. War crimes, yes. And the International Criminal Court, which is a lot more precise and a lot more, has a higher threshold juridically, has decided to level accusations against both the Israeli and the Hamas leadership of essentially war crimes, using methods of war which are illegal. They're not claiming that Israel does not have the right to self-defense. To the opposite, they are explicitly reinforcing that Israel has this right, but they're saying even if you have a just cause for war, this does not justify every method. So one method that they're pointing out is hunger. Whatever your goals are in a war, it never can justify letting or stopping the shipment of food and water and electricity to a civilian population, and thus putting pressure on people who it's not the choice of their own to be in this war zone. So to give you just a brief outlook, the judges at the International Criminal Court will decide in a few weeks whether they will issue the arrest warrants against both the Hamas leadership and Netanyahu and Gallant. And I think it's very likely that they will agree to issue these arrest warrants, meaning that Netanyahu and Gallant will never be able to travel to Europe ever again.
Kristen, how do you see the political impact of these two international court decisions, or at least the prospect of the arrest warrants on the one hand and the ruling about how Israel should prosecute its military campaign on the other? Are they largely symbolic? Could they even reinforce the intransigence of Netanyahu and his government?
Well, I think what we have to stress right now is what these international courts are trying to do is to change the situation within Gaza. It's not about defining do we have a genocide or not. It's about how to prevent that a genocide could possibly happen. So this is behind the idea. The idea is how to implement international humanitarian law against whoever breaks it, be it a democratically elected leadership, be it a dictatorship, be it a terrorist group. So this is important here to stress. It's not about pressuring an Israeli government or discrediting Israel as a state. It's about implementing international humanitarian law as far as the two courts we are talking about. About the recognition of Palestine, this is obviously it's symbolic, but I think it comes out of the idea that we saw with the 7th of October, these horrible crimes committed there, that we cannot go back to a situation before where we just neglected the whole subject. We have to understand that without a Palestinian state and some kind of sovereignty, a life of Palestinians in dignity, in freedom, there will not be a solution to this conflict. And the idea of countries like Ireland or Spain is to stress this, that these people are now, these countries are committed to this two-state solution that for a too long time has just been held up as some kind of, declaration without doing anything to implement this. So this is a major step, and it's a symbolic, it's a signal as well to the Palestinians to not give up hope and to believe in some kind of political solution to prevent terrorist crimes that we just saw.
Marcus, last question, very brief answer, if you would. Our title asks whether Israel is ever more isolated. Would you say increasing isolation will make a difference in getting us closer to a cessation of the conflict?
I don't think so. I think with Germany and the US standing so closely on Israel's side, I think they will get out of this situation, despite the recognition of Palestine and the court decisions which we have talked.
Thank you very much to all of you for being with us, and thanks to all of you out there for tuning in. Look at our website and tell us what you think. See you soon.